Welcome to IdeaGen TV. Today we have with us Luke Niazi, IBM's Global Manager for Retail Industry. Luke, welcome.
Hi, George. Nice to meet you.
It's so great to have you on IdeaGen TV today, Luke, live from the UK. How is everything in the UK today?
Well, today it's actually a lovely, bright, sunny day here in Greater London, which is where I live. But of course, we're in the current stages of kind of the broader opening up of the lockdown that has occurred around the world and dealing with the pandemic. And of course, there's a lot of activity going on to try to stimulate those parts of the economy that have taken a while to get going. So, like many countries around the world, we're all working our way through how to deal with the current pandemic and getting as much of the economy up and running again.
That's right. And we applaud the work that you and IBM have been doing to help develop conversations and continue operations for so many across the planet. It's a critical component of keeping the global economy moving, quite frankly. And so we applaud you for that work. And specifically as part of the dialogue on the Sustainable Development Goals, Luke, look, a few short months ago, it seems like years, decades maybe, a few short months ago, we were looking at that 10-year span to achieve the global goals of the United Nations by 2030. And we said, well, there's scorecards and we're doing well here. We may do better there, but we had a pretty crystal clear picture of what needed to be done in terms of, helping to achieve those goals. I know IBM espouses the goals, leads on the goals, is helping to further the goals and ultimately to achieve the goals. And so I'd like to begin by asking you, Luke, what is IBM doing in the area of sustainability?
IBM, George, is committed to sustainability, and we work to help our clients achieve their business goals. And in the work that we do, we see that helping clients achieve their societal, their business objectives, as well as maybe if they're a government organization, their national objectives, can go hand in hand with achieving sustainability goals, and actually that they can be highly complementary. And a lot of the work that we do is around trying to help clients become more advanced. We use the terms bringing kind of all the powers of technology to become more advanced through AI and cognitive technologies, and to deploy those into the right architecture to make them successful. We refer to that as the hybrid cloud, but we do that with a view to making industries and organizations more effective and more efficient and ever improving. And engineering sustainability into that is a key aspect of what we do. And of course, we do it across all sectors, whether that's the energy sector, whether that's automotive or transportation, public sectors, or the sectors that I lead, which is the consumer industries, comprising retail, as you said, but also consumer products and agriculture. And how we drive sustainability into those consumer industries, and in particular across the end-to-end food value chain. And of course, that's all tied back to the 10 key sustainable development goals that we think that we can drive most alignment to.
Incredible. And what a role to have, to be global managing director of consumer industries. I mean, this is a massive portfolio that you're leading, and what a time to be doing so. Luke, would you kindly share an example or two of how you and IBM are helping clients achieve their sustainability goals, especially, again, during this time?
Yeah, well, there are many different things we're doing, but I'm going to focus in on the industries that I'm involved in. And if you think about the whole of the food value chain, everything from what goes on at the farm, how it's then processed, and how it then ends up in stores, and how we then consume that. Or indeed, if you think about the same end-to-end value chain as you look at how cotton is grown, or other materials that go into the clothes that we consume, and how those are manufactured, and how those are then transported and distributed and ultimately consumed. There's a massive amount that we can do to make those value chains much more sustainable, all the way from the client experience to the way that the resources are grown, and the way the manufacturing works, and then the way the travel and logistics works in between. And I start with the consumer engagement piece, because actually, unless you change consumer behavior, no matter how good and how responsible a supply chain you have, and how good your core manufacturing processes are, unless you change behavior to make people connect with sustainable value chains, then we don't make the difference. And so we work with clients like Yara, where we're combining their agronomic experience and their data with the capabilities that we bring in terms of our global weather technologies and our AI, and also our cloud capabilities, in order to think about how we can really put the power of data back into the hands of farmers, whether those are professional farmers or the many millions of smallholder farmers, with a view to trying to drive a much more sustainable use of products like fertilizers and water and pesticides, and how they work through the end-to-end food production. And building that out in the agricultural industry is a key example. And then connecting that into systems and processes that allow you to prove the veracity of products across the end-to-end value chain. So we work a lot with many companies, in fact, with a blockchain technology that we refer to as Food Trust. And on that technology, we're able to look at the whole experience of where food has been in its life cycle, and that has many different permutations in terms of how it's being used. It's being used, for example, by Norwegian farmers to make sure that Arctic salmon is grown and consumed in a much more responsible way. It's being used in retail, both in the US and in Europe. Both Walmart and Carrefour being big clients of what we're doing, to connect consumer experience about the chicken that they're buying, or the fresh green peppers that they're buying, to really understand where they came from, and by doing so, choose to go for products that are more sustainable in the way that they've been grown and transported and ultimately delivered to the store.
And so incredible when you describe the breadth and depth of this work. And so what are some of the examples of challenges, perhaps, that your clients are facing? And to go a bit further, what is prompting them to make changes?
Well, we have to kind of separate the kind of short term from the longer term. Obviously, the challenges that everyone's been facing in the last 4 months, George, of course, has been the big shocks that have occurred due to the pandemic. And with these demand shocks coming from consumers, and then with these supply shocks coming from broken value chains, people have been kind of dealing with just trying to cope through the pandemic. And of course, after the initial 4 to 5 weeks of peak, you've seen that stabilize. But much more longer term, at the very beginning of this year, I was at the NRF and I talked about a piece of research that we had launched in conjunction with the NRF, where we'd surveyed over 19,000 consumers in 28 different countries around the world, across all different kind of economic segments. And what we found was really quite startling, which was, for the first time ever, the desire of what we call the purpose-driven consumer. Those are the consumers who cared about things like sustainability and better energy usage and the increased use of recycling of products, were almost as large a group, 40%, as the largest group of consumers, which are the convenience-driven consumers. 41% of consumers are convenience-driven, and of course, therefore, their choices are made by price, availability, and convenience. Whereas the purpose-driven consumer, this group that's nearly as large, they are much more likely to make their decisions based on things like sustainability. In fact, 7 out of 10 are more likely in that group, the purpose-driven consumer, to make choices out of sustainability, and they're actually prepared to pay more for those sustainable choices for those companies that are able to demonstrate that. Now, the challenges, of course, are, how do you make this, truly a C-suite priority, and then how do you make sure that as a company, you're still able to drive, value and competitive advantage, because all companies have to operate and make an appropriate margin to be able to be successful, and therefore, how do you ally that business strategy of driving sustainability and your core values and really engineer that through the entirety of your life cycle? And I think, that this is the difference between kind of people who kind of market a sustainable agenda versus people who really engineer a sustainable agenda. And we're working very much with those clients and customers who want to engineer sustainability, everything from what went into the ground, how that manufacturing process is much more energy efficient, how the distribution and logistics are made to be as efficient as possible so that we reduce the carbon footprint of transportation. How do we make sure that when products are in people's hands, that all of the information that they get at the point of purchase gives them the sustainable choice so that they can make that decision? And you get it more in food, but I'm sure you, like me, have a number of pairs of kind of jeans in your wardrobe. But how often, when you bought those jeans, were you presented with a sustainable decision about where those jeans came from? Hardly ever. And so, kind of really engineering that in the end-to-end life cycle, and then showing how companies who do well in that can ultimately make it more be more successful is really what we're about. And that takes a lot of change at a lot of different levels. I've talked about cultural change, I've talked about leadership change, I've talked about metric change, I've talked about how you engineer manufacturing processes, how you engineer sourcing processes, how you change consumer behavior end to end. And it's a big challenge to work that through. But I do believe, pandemic aside, that the 2020s are the decade when this bow wave of the purpose-driven consumer is going to really make a difference. And we're going to see clients adopt the sustainable development goals and really engineer their end-to-end processes to be more sustainable, to be more energy efficient, to reduce the carbon footprint.
Luke, what I really enjoyed hearing from you is really what you described, which is the business case for companies, large and small, to take on achieving the goals and through the lens of sustainability, obviously. And I think companies can do very well by looking at this business case and this opportunity, as you describe it, to do more good and to do better for their company. So it's not either or, it's a business case. And so any perspective there on what folks are telling you, just to take it just a bit further on the business case specifically?
Well, I think it was very interesting, actually, earlier this year at Davos in Switzerland. The whole focus of Davos this year was all around sustainability. And one of the key comments that was made, I think it was BlackRock that talked about it. The CEO of BlackRock talked about how, when they're looking at the investment portfolio and the investments that they're making in companies, that they're really looking for evidence that the companies that they're investing in really have got the sustainable agenda really engineered into their businesses and the way that they're going to be making money. And so if the source of finance that serves companies, equity, other sources of bank financing, is really looking as evidence of that starts to drive behaviors quite significantly, i.e. you're not going to be able to get the finances to be in the company if you can't demonstrate good behavior. But then those companies that are able to demonstrate their commitments, and I think about companies like Walmart, I've mentioned them already, about their gigaton commitments, companies like Unilever that are making big commitments around driving changes to their sustainability agenda alongside companies like L'Oreal and Danone and others. The reason why they're doing it is because not only is it right for the planet and right for society and right for their customers, but ultimately they're able to get a greater demand for the things that they make and sell. And people care about, I think people are increasingly caring about how they consume, and they want to leave a planet that is going to sustain for the future generations. And so all of this comes together with a deeper, business case for driving towards sustainability. And of course, being more efficient in your energy use and being low in your carbon footprint is also going to be good for you in terms of costs of your energy consumption, but also the carbon tax implications also. So many of these things make a difference to the financial performance of a company. And we've seen that when it comes to what people are prepared to pay, people are prepared to pay at this point in time a greater margin for those companies that drive sustainability. So when you look at it across the end-to-end value chain, from where the source of finance comes, in terms of how you run your operations, to the price that you sell at, there is an economic case for the time being, at least, to see that sustainability is not only good for us at large, but it's good for business also.
Incredible perspective, Luke. And so as we look at this global pandemic affecting everyone on the planet, perhaps in the same exact way for the very first time in human history, we're all experiencing the same exact situation, and the positive and the more difficult effects of it all. How do you see this as having changed how the world, and specifically your clients, look at sustainability? And to go further, how?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we are all recognizing is the fact that, in a way, our supply chains have become almost too global. We've had that convenience delivered whereby at a click you could get a product from anywhere in the world with a fairly reasonable travel time delivered to you, in the kind of window that you wanted. Yeah, and so the big rise of the digital commerce platforms, and I'm not just referring to the ones in Western economies. I'm thinking about the ones around the world as well, in the East as well. They've driven this great kind of disconnect between what you consume and where it really came from and how it was sourced. And convenience has risen, but it's caused increased complexity, increased cost into the end-to-end supply chain. The impact of the coronavirus shock suddenly made companies realize that they needed to drive a more regional approach to their supply chains. Apologies for the background noise. There's a helicopter going above me at the moment. But driving towards a regional supply chain. So how can I make, source, and deliver in a more regional context? And so I think we're going to see global, local rise, and we're going to see that in people's buying decisions. You just know yourself that you're not just going to one shop now to go and get your food and grocery. You're going to a combination of things because they are able to deliver to you because they have local supply. And so I think we're going to see a change in buying behavior also. So regionalization, a change in buying behavior, but also a need to understand, and this is a big analytics challenge, but it's this understanding these local demand patterns, because they're different now. And how do you kind of plan for those local demand patterns, and how do you make sure that you've got the right product at the right time in the right location with a lower carbon footprint in terms of delivering it to either the home delivery or the buy online, pick up at store, or pick up at pavement kind of model. And so getting that intelligence on local demand patterns, and also those local demand patterns being driven by how the locality of the pandemic is driving, and then looking back into the sourcing of the associated raw materials and where they're coming from, all of that has had to adjust. And I think we're going to see an ongoing need to adjust, but combined with a big consumer awareness of, I've got to be much more thoughtful about what I'm doing as a consumer, but where things are coming from. And I think in the right way, this can actually act as an accelerator of a greater adoption of sustainable products and supply chain and fulfillment.
Yes, and it's so interesting to hear that global perspective, especially from your very unique vantage point. I mean, you're sitting at the nexus of the consumer industry, across the planet, and you're watching this morph into something perhaps so much better, where the consumer now will expect to understand better where their whatever it is that they're buying is sourced, and I find that incredibly interesting and incredibly inspiring. Um, Shifting a bit, Luke, perhaps in some ways to a more serious topic, the world we've seen has become smaller, but at the very same time, it seems that the world perhaps has become more divided now than ever. It's it's an interesting paradigm, and with changing geopolitical, economic, and social restrictions, how do you believe it will affect overall the sustainable development goals and the achievement thereof?
Oh, that's a big question, George. It's a big question. I think, well, across all industries, what we've seen with the pandemic is the massive acceleration of digitization. And what I mean by that, everything from banks and food processes to the way that we consume our content, everything is accelerated in terms of digital acceleration. And so that digital acceleration has the potential to accelerate the right type of sustainable behaviors and outcomes if handled the right way. But at the same time, it's occurring with an increased kind of regionalized and more defensive approach in certain countries and certain economies and how they're interacting with one another. And so, I mean, I have many clients in the East and in China, but you can also see what's going on at the moment in terms of the trade conflicts that are occurring between the US and China. You're seeing some of that kind of pan out in my own home country here in the UK. And I think what's occurring is a reinforcement of kind of, I've got to look after my patch from a government and political perspective. And so you're getting kind of almost further regionalized behavior. But actually, that further regionalized behavior, if coupled with the things that we've already talked about during this interview, George, it could actually accelerate the right outcomes that we want from the Sustainable Development Goals. Because if I can source more regionally, it can be lower carbon footprint, it can be more energy efficient. There's an opportunity there. And so I do think that while I don't like necessarily what's occurring, in terms of the global political environment at the moment, it might drive a consequence that continues to reinforce rather than detract from where we're heading on Sustainable Development Goals, albeit, there's always the benefit of that kind of the global nature of peer pressure on moving society forward.
Luke Niazi, Global Managing Director, Consumer Industries at IBM, live from the UK. We can't thank you enough for the incredible perspectives. I think, Luke, you and I could have a conversation that could span weeks, if not months. We've just scratched the surface on your incredible perspectives and insights. I think while we're in the midst of this global pandemic, there is reason to believe that some positive aspects are emerging globally, and perhaps those lasting effects will take us through to hopefully helping to achieve, with your efforts, especially at IBM, the global goals of the United Nations by 2030. Luke, how can folks find out more information about your work at IBM?
You can find out just by going to ibm.com and looking at industries, and you'll find everything that we're doing from an industry's perspective, whether it's in my industry, the consumer industries, or indeed in some of the other industries that I referred to. So just go online and check it out.
Luke Niazi, Global Managing Director, Consumer Industries at IBM. Global leadership defined. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, George.